Next question I have for you, Mr. Law Director, is since I'm just trying to get a little sense of this. I'm not here to judge today. I'd like the Attorney General to make a decision. But what qualifies you as a registered voter? I mean, we've got one person voting here, just in general, without being specific. What are the requirements?
Well, you have to be a resident. And you have to be a resident not just by the mere fact that you live there. And that is referred to, and I appreciate the letter from Mr. Murphy, the counsel for the Election Commission. But there's more to it than what Mr. Murphy expresses in his letter. In a situation like this, where a person changes their voting registration, you have to look behind the registration. The letter from Mr. Murphy indicates that Mr. McKay asked Mr. Meek about whether he continued to live at the residence. And that's certainly one question that should be and must be asked. But there are others. I believe the statute cited in the letter by James Murphy, TCA 2-2-122, provides that you have to go further and look behind the change in residence. And here, where you have one voter, it shouldn't have been that hard to do. You have to look at the purpose for the person's presence at that address. The information that we have is that this person, and basically some of the information is verified by this letter from Mr. Murphy, where there's an indication that Mr. Zitzman, the attorney for the owner of the property, indicated to Mr. McKay that Mr. Meek was overseeing the property. In my mind, that should have sent up a red flag to the Election Commission to look behind the intent of that registrant. If you look behind the intent of the registrant, I think you could come to the conclusion that the registrant is there for a business purpose or for a commercial use purpose. And if that's the reason they are there, they are not properly a resident under our election code. So they would not be permitted to vote. And that's pretty much what I gleaned from the letter, from the information that we had, and from the code.
Well, let me ask one more question about that. If, say, a person registers at an address, say, March 8th, at what point should he take possession? Or should he already be in possession, or a week later, or 2 weeks later?
I don't know that there is a certain point that they have to take possession, so to speak, as that might be defined. But they have to be a valid resident of that address, certainly, at the very least. And in my opinion, based upon what I know, now an investigation might give us more information. We had depositions scheduled for Friday morning and all day on Friday, the day before I withdrew the lawsuit, the day before I was asked to withdraw the lawsuit. The deposition notices and subpoenas were opposed by the deponents. So they would not have been there to give their depositions in that instance anyway. And we would like to ask all of those questions. There are a number of unanswered questions here. I don't have all the answers. That's why we had noticed all of these parties for deposition.
Okay, one more thing. Just back to the 12 people that signed on with Mr. Harmon, and it's my personal opinion they did it because we all have a lot of respect for Ivan, and if he asked, we'd like to go along with it. But I don't think a lot of people knew exactly what was at stake during that time. For instance, I don't think that many of us know that in the resolution passed by City Council on September 26th, and also referred to an agreement between the developer and the city, the developer has a requirement as the developer acquires more contiguous property to come back to the city and ask for annexation by referendum again on parcel after parcel until he's assembled what he wants. We get this notion that this was a one-time annexation issue, but it's really more than that. It's an agreement to keep acquiring property, keep petitioning the city to take them in by referendum. And among other things, I think this sets a precedent for any other unincorporated area in Knox County that we need to be aware of, which brings me, Mr. Law Director, back to one more point, and that's the written agreement that the county has with the city regarding the urban growth boundaries. And in that, as I understand it, it's specific about how the city can annex outside its urban growth boundary. And yet, what has happened here does not follow that written agreement.
That's right. There is a provision within the agreement that we have with the city which lays out the procedure to be followed. It goes to a committee, it's studied, and in this instance, this was done by referendum. It is a procedure that is not provided for in our urban growth plan agreement.
So, again, I'm not sure that's even part of what we're asking the state attorney to take a look at.
It is not. That is not in our resolution. We have not asked the state attorney general to look into our affairs with the city as far as our urban growth plan agreement. We have not asked that question. And in fact, if this body wished, we could, at some point within the next 11 months, we could explore that further with another lawsuit to challenge whether our agreement with the city has been breached. We could have a number of discussions with them, I think, too, that might be beneficial first. But like I say, what brought me to filing the lawsuit in this instance was the statute of limitations, especially in regard to the election challenge.
I'll only mention that to get back to Mr. Schmidt for just a second. He seems to think that some of us can't get over this idea of the city from annex. Well, we've got a legal document where we pay millions of dollars over time to the city. It can cease on the Development Corporation Board of Directors, and I would expect that those conditions of that contract be honored. In this case, clearly they were not. Now, I'm just making a statement.
You've heard my name.
Well, you used my name and said you'd already heard what you wanted to hear, so I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Guda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the law department, I understand that there's been a law passed, was it by the legislature, that allowed for annexation by referendum, and that has just come about in the last year. Is that correct?
I believe it was 2005. That's right.
Okay, so would that state law not, I don't like to use the word trump, but
it would not supersede our agreement.
It does not.
Would be my opinion. It would not.
Do you think there are those in either a city or county administration that would think that it did?
Yes.